But let's start with the NFL draft. The Cowboys get Tyler Smith. It was a wild night. Georgia, 5 first-round picks. The Big 12 altogether had none. There will be a bunch, you would think, tonight based on the names that are left on the board. Craig, your observations from round 1.
Well, we're going to have to kind of put it in categories because there's a lot to unpack from last night. Like,
put them in categories.
Do you want to talk about the Big 12s getting shut out? Do you want to talk about Georgia's dominance? Do you want to talk about all the trades?
Just go at it.
I mean,
I'll turn down my laptop first. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, as far as the Big 12 getting shut out, I mean, I don't think that's a complete surprise. I mean, there were a couple of borderline guys like Breece Hall and Jalen Petrie that had a chance to possibly go in the first round, but I think that was really close shut with the run on wide receivers and them sort of dominating that first round. So, Hall and Petrie should both go tonight. And I would think, somewhat early-ish. I don't think they're going to be there at the end of the night, still waiting around is my point. So, there will be some guys, but yeah, it's alarming. And I pointed out, hey, at least if there was the new schools here, you'd have had 3 first-round picks in the last 2 years. And by no means was I bragging when I said that. It was just an observation that, a bunch of people were saying, oh, that's 2 years in a row the Big 12's been shut out. And, it's just kind of funny that includes Oklahoma and Texas. So, they're not really contributing to the output right now, and that's a big reason why. And not to mention, you also have 10 teams, which people just kind of gloss over. Now, that's not why the Big 12's got 0, is because they have less teams than Oklahoma and Texas are producing. I think in general there's a talent gap that's growing larger, and that's as worrisome as the money gap that's growing larger between yourselves and then the other conferences like the SEC and the Big 10 in particular, who were littered. But, I do think with the Big 12, it kind of sucks because anytime you talk about OU and Texas, if you're somebody who's covering or is a fan of the teams that are sticking around, if you say anything negative about them, it's going to be misconstrued as, oh, well, you just hate them because they're leaving, right? Which is not the case. They're still going to be around for maybe the next 3 years. So we're going to keep talking about Oklahoma and Texas, Big 12 member Oklahoma and Texas. And quite frankly, they can't be getting shut out in the first round, both of them in the same year. And not
as many times,
and not 2 years in a row.
Yeah,
not exactly. 2 years in a row. And you can't have Texas going a decade without a first-round pick. So, there's a lot of contributing factors, just having 10 schools, your 2 blue bloods. And I point them out because they're the ones that have the top 10 recruiting classes over and over and over. And if they're not top 10, they're top 15 or 20. And I look around last night in the Big 10, who are their big dogs? They've got Ohio State, they've got Michigan, right? And then you can throw Penn State in there. They have guys in the first round. You look at the Pac-12, who are their big dogs? It's Oregon and USC.
And Washington had a first-round pick. Yeah.
They've got guys in the first round.
Yep.
You look at the SEC. I mean, they've got several, but Georgia and Alabama, multiple guys in the first round. And then the ACC is actually kind of an outlier because they've got a weird mixture where it's not like Florida State and Miami guys dominating, or even Clemson for that matter. It was, Boston College and Pitt. So hats off to the ACC for having some depth. But, yeah, I mean, the Big 12, they don't have their big dogs pulling their weight, and then the other schools aren't producing first-round level talent either. So it is something I've brought up before, and I don't know how you really correct it, quite frankly. Having more schools should help. But even then, like as I pointed out, okay, Sauce Gardner, in theory, you could count, and BYU last year was Zach Wilson, and Houston last year had a first-rounder. And they'll have probably maybe the first name picked tonight, right. But that's not the first round with Logan Hall going off pretty quickly. But even then, that's still only 3 over 2 years. So, yeah, there's a massive talent gap right now. I think having 12 schools again and even 14 maybe for a year will help, at least in those draft classes. But we can't bet that BYU is going to keep producing Zach Wilsons or Cincinnati is going to keep producing Sauce Gardners either. So, hopefully they do, and hopefully, Dave Aranda and Joey McGuire and, all these other coaches, Matt Campbell, they, are able to start pushing some first-rounders out there. But they're not going to totally close that talent gap. But, yeah, 2 years in a row with no pick and no Oklahoma and Texas involved either, I think that's not a good thing.
I think you could see 6 or 8 names, maybe more, perhaps from the Big 12 tonight with rounds 2 and 3. And, of course, those 64 picks. Baylor could have 1 or 2 names in that mix. Also, Iowa State, as we mentioned, and even Oklahoma among some others. Georgia had 5. That's a record. So like somebody said, Georgia had more first-round picks than the entire Big 12. Oh, By 5. They had more first-round picks than anybody, and it's the most ever in the first round, 5, which is also, you look at who was drafted, what side of the ball they were drafted, and you look at when they were drafted, and that's just amazing. That's the kind of team they had, and they won the national championship with those players. And Alabama had theirs among some others. LSU early on with the defensive back, Stingley. And so...
And the record's the 5 defenders. The 5 defensive guys is the record. And, I mean... Duh, right? And then they didn't have all of them drafted. I mean, one of the biggest snubs from last night was a Georgia guy.
Kobe Dean, right?
Yeah. So, it's just funny that they are that loaded. I mean, it's just silly, not funny. But kudos to Kirby Smart and company. And again, that speaks to that talent gap when a single defense can have more picks than most conferences have, whether they were shut out like the Big 12 was or whether they had 1 or 2 like some of the others. I mean, they trumped everybody. So, yeah, just speaks to that talent level, and again, I don't know how you start to really close that, but
you start getting better recruits, and you start developing the ones you have, which Texas and Oklahoma, they're the ones that get the top 5 or 10 classes, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, and that's again why we're going to make it very clear that any negative ever that we talk about with Texas and OU is not a Big 12 thing, because they're Big 12 members and they're going to the SEC, and that's not going to make me talk about them any differently because I'm not wired all weird like that like some people. But yeah, they do need to pull their weight. Now Lincoln Riley's gone. You look back, it's like, wow, the end of the Lincoln Riley era produced 0 first-rounders after that string of quarterbacks, right? And so, that kind of makes you wonder, like, what happened there? And then with Texas, I mean, I don't know what the excuse is. One time we had a guy barking at us because said they didn't develop players well enough and pointed out, like, I don't know, it was like DeMarvion Overshown or something. It's like, okay, if you want to give, and I'll yield that, okay, if you want to give credit and say the statement that they never develop anybody any better is false, okay, that's not really what was being said to begin with, but if you want to read it word for word that way, fine. But when they're shut out in the first round 2 years in a row, coming off of classes that are top 10, top 15, top 10, top 5 over the last several years, then they're not developing the way that they should be. They're really not. And, everybody else has to pull their weight too. Iowa State, for all of the great talent they've had. I mean, it's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round talent. Baylor, same thing. So... everybody jumps up and puts that first rounder in there on occasion, like a Corey Coleman or something. But, there's not nearly enough stardom to NFL translating in terms of that first round in particular. But like you said, when tonight is over with, I'm sure that we will be talking about Breece Hall and Jalen Petrie and any other number of guys. Some of those Oklahoma guys will come off the board for sure as well. It'll be a good night for the Big 12.
No question about it. But tomorrow...